I'm Adrienne Pedersen. Today on Upfront, not guilty. Kyle Rittenhouse acquitted on all charges of shooting 3 people, killing 2 during the Kenosha riots. Next, attorney Craig Mastantuono on what we learned from this case. Then the impact of big racially tinged trials on the Black community. Plus, the Rittenhouse trial and gun rights. I'll ask a gun rights advocate if Kyle Rittenhouse should be considered a hero, like some are saying.
Taking on the issues important to Wisconsin. This is Upfront with your host, Adrienne Pedersen.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty.
Kyle Rittenhouse, the Illinois teen who fatally shot 2 demonstrators during the Kenosha riots, is a free man. Hello and thank you for joining us. A Kenosha jury on Friday found Rittenhouse not guilty after 3 weeks of testimony and jury deliberations. Rittenhouse brought a rifle to the demonstrations in Kenosha that followed the police shooting of Jacob Blake. He said he went there to protect private property. He ended up shooting 2 men and seriously wounding a third in events captured on video. Rittenhouse claimed self-defense and the jury agreed. After the verdict, his attorney said Rittenhouse had gone home.
He has a huge sense of relief for what the jury did to him today. He wishes none of this would have ever happened. But as he said when he testified, he did not start this.
The case made national news and ignited countless debates on social media. We're talking about the issues raised in this case and what comes next with criminal defense attorney Craig Mastantuono. Such a big case. It all revolves around self-defense. What precedent does this set?
Well, I think for the law of self-defense in Wisconsin, probably not much. You know, it's applied differently in every case, right? But societal implications, I mean, this was a really high-profile case. I gave an interview at one point to the second largest newspaper in Japan, is what the reporter told me. That gives you an idea of how much the country and the world was paying attention, and you know that. And I think that the questions that arose during, the attention that was paid to this case arose for a reason, and that's, what does the law say when people get into conflict? Does it apply fairly to everybody? And, in terms of people wondering whether self-defense is afforded as a privilege fairly across the board to all segments of our society is going to be something people are going to continue to have debates about and use this trial, use this case as a teaching point at best and as a point of contention at worst, probably.
Where does this go from here? Is this over? Do you think there will be civil litigation?
I don't, if I'm predicting. There may be civil litigation initiated. There may be civil trial sought, maybe federal review by federal justice officials. But I don't see this resulting in another trial or case determination, if I'm predicting.
Why not?
Well, I mean, the prosecution had a very unique case to try to make, right? That Mr. Rittenhouse was guilty because he took the life of 2 people and shot another. He raised an affirmative defense. 12 people reached a conclusion that that affirmative defense of self-defense applied across the board, that he was privileged in his actions. Suing him in civil court, there's a lower burden of proof that needs to be met. But that acquittal, I think, is a strong statement, and you're going to have to get an attorney to carry that litigation forward. Having said that, it's possible somebody will pick that up and try to meet the burden with a lower burden of proof.
There's been a lot of talk about Judge Schroeder, whether that's on social media or the national media weighing in. We also heard from people saying that they think he's an extremely biased judge. That is what some community activists were saying. I believe a member of Jacob Blake's family said that. Did you see that in the courtroom in terms of bias?
I've had experience in that courtroom, and I've tried at least one trial in that courtroom that went a week long, so my perspective is different. I mean, I saw the judge that I have practiced in front of, and I also saw the criticisms. I think what happened is you have a hyper-attention focused, right, on this trial, and you saw some of the uniqueness of the judge involved. And all judges are unique. Judge Schroeder is not unique among people that are otherwise, homogenous, right? And so some of those, kind of quirks or the way he runs his courtroom or the way that he was talking was amplified and then subject to great scrutiny in a case that drew out a lot of emotion on one side or the other that involved race as kind of the social backdrop for the discussions around this. So, that's a lot of filtering through to put out an opinion. And I think you saw that here. I saw the judge that runs his courtroom that way pretty much all the time.
People also keep saying, oh, this is so political. This is most political time, the most divided time we've ever had. What have you seen being an attorney all these years? Do politics always play a role in the courtroom? Is this different?
Well, I mean, speaking about this case, right, I think it's a little naive to say we're in unprecedented times. Our country has been through hot times politically throughout history, right? And there have been many, many big cases. This case, brought into discussion, both outside of the courtroom and to a smaller extent inside the courtroom, big issues, right? The backdrop of Mr. Rittenhouse getting involved in the charges or the conduct that led to the charges was him coming up to, counter, if you will, a protest and then some violence that was over whether the question of whether Black lives matter in our society and whether our criminal justice system is fair to people of color. And, these events coming out of that, raised a lot of issues: race, criminal justice fairness, vigilantism, if you will, the right to defend oneself, the right to bear arms, open carry. All that was infused into this.
Can we say keep politics out of the courtroom? Is that possible?
I don't think it's possible in a case like this. I don't think it's possible in most cases. What you need to do is, focus the discussion on the law. But we're also a little naive in that regard, too, because we assume that the law is kind of divorced from all human considerations. These jurors took back to their deliberations instructions that used words like reasonable, provoke. Everybody, that means 12 things to 12 different people. So when you're arguing about what's reasonable, you're arguing about it from your perspective. And we live in a country where people of color feel like the justice system doesn't apply fairly to them.
Attorney Craig Mastituno, thank you.
Thank you.
Next on Up Front, the effect of trials like the Rittenhouse case on the Black community. I'll talk to an expert who says they can cause PTSD. And later, the trial from the perspective of a gun rights advocate. Should Kyle Rittenhouse be hailed a hero, as some are saying?